Okay, I'd like to start. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning for Outreach and International Affairs Conversations on Race webinar series, this time focusing on experiences of Virginia Tech African faculty. We're wearing masks due to the COVID-19 global pandemic. This is our norm at Virginia Tech to remind people to wear face coverings, take care of each other, and stay healthy. Everyone presenting in this webinar is in a private space. Please remove your mask if you're in a safe location, and please remember to wear a mask when you're not able to physically distance. Good morning. I'm Maria Elisa Christie. I'm Director of Women and Gender in International Development at the Center for International Research, Education, and Development within Outreach and International Affairs. I'm also the Inclusivity Rep for Outreach and International Affairs, and I help guide OIA's inclusion and diversity initiatives. So as of last night, we had over 180 people registered for this webinar, including over 60 OIA employees, and we are very happy to have all of you join us this morning. So a little bit of context for this event. On June 5th, in the wake of George Floyd's killing and the ensuing national unrest, Dr. Mena Pratt-Clark, Virginia Tech's VP for Strategic Affairs and Diversity, and Dr. Michelle DeRamo, the Assistant Provost for Diversity Education, led an unfinished conversation on race. And they called on folks throughout Virginia Tech to engage in courageous conversations and take action to address systemic racism. I'm going to share the link here to the unfinished conversation. That, as well as several other conversations that they have led, are found on their YouTube channel. So OIA heeded that call. We developed several initiatives, including OIA Conversations on Race. This is our second in the webinar series. I know many of you joined us for the first one, which was in September. That one focused primarily on the local situation and included the Virginia Tech Police Chief, 3 esteemed Virginia Tech faculty, and a representative of the local NAACP. This one has a more global focus while still anchored in the Virginia Tech experience. So our goal through this series, OIA aims to create a safe space for difficult or courageous conversations, learning, and dialogue surrounding systemic racism in our communities in the Commonwealth and the globe. This panel today will be a conversation with Virginia Tech faculty from 3 different regions in Africa, Northern, West, and Southern Africa. I just want to stress they are not newcomers to the United States or Virginia Tech. Between the 3 of them, they've lived in the US for over 57 years, with 51 years cumulatively at Virginia Tech. You can find information on our OIA conversations at our website, including the recording of the first conversation. And this panel will also be recorded and will be available shortly on that website as well. So we received questions from many of you in advance of the event today, and we will get to as many of them as we can. We do apologize in advance if we do not get to all of them. Part of the feedback after the first OIA conversation was that participants wanted more dialogue between panelists. So towards that end, we actually are not going to have Q&A enabled today, despite what the slideshow said at the beginning. Rather, the moderator, Dr. Kathleen Alexander, is going to guide the panelists through the questions that were submitted on our website earlier. So before turning this over to Dr. Guru Ghosh to introduce the moderator, let me introduce our 3 panelists. You can find their bios on our OIA Conversations page, as well as their faculty web pages, and they will further introduce themselves. Dr. Emmanuel Frimpong is a professor of fish ecology and conservation in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation at Virginia Tech. He was born and grew up in Ghana, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources Management in 1997 from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. In the US, he completed graduate studies from the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff and HBCU, Virginia Tech, and Purdue University. As faculty at Virginia Tech since 2007, Dr. Frimpong has maintained research programs in the United States and Sub-Saharan Africa, including current and recent programs in Ghana, Cameroon, Kenya, and Tanzania. In 2014, he was named a Carnegie African Diaspora Fellow by the Institute of International Education. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Frimpong. Dr. Khaled Khassouna is the Associate Director for Middle East and North Africa Initiatives and Associate Director for Curriculum Development in the Center for International Research, Education, and Development. In his previous post, he was the International Coordinator for the Conservation Management Institute in the College of Natural Resources and Environment here at Virginia Tech. He's an environmentalist and educator, and is an expert in community development, sustainable environmental education and development, curriculum design, and cross-cultural relations. He works with universities, NGOs, and consultant firms in the Middle East, the US, and around the world, and specializes in increasing communication and understanding between diverse groups of people, cultures, and organizational structures. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, an MSc in Natural Resources Management, and a PhD in Environmental Design and Planning. As an Egyptian, before he came to the US, he was a National Park Warden, planner, and managed the National Biodiversity Database Unit. Thank you, Dr. Hassouna. Dr. Joseph Mukuni, a native of Zambia, Africa, is a Career and Technical Education, or CTE, program leader at Virginia Tech in the School of Education. He holds a PhD in CTE. He has several years' experience in teaching educational administration and in management of educational development projects. His teaching experience includes higher ed courses in English language communication skills for technical and business studies, CTE methodologies, curriculum development, behavior management in K-12 classrooms, administrative leadership in CTE, student assessment for workforce development, program evaluation, educational policy analysis, and international trends in workforce development. His experience in management and administration include being head of department, a college chief executive officer, and a national director for technical vocational education and training in the government of Zambia. He's attended professional development programs in several countries, including China, Tanzania, Malawi, Swaziland, and Denmark. Over the last 5 years, Dr. Mukuni has volunteered to teach classes about Africa at the Lifelong Learning Institute at Virginia Tech. Thank you, Dr. Mukuni. So as you can see, all three of our speakers are accomplished experts in their fields. They are not experts on race, but they've nonetheless generously accepted to join us in this conversation and share their personal experiences and perspectives to help us learn and move forward in these difficult times. I thank them all from the bottom of my heart for this. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Guru Ghosh, Vice President for Outreach and International Affairs. Dr. Ghosh leads an administrative unit that fosters engagement initiatives, including economic development and continuing and professional education, and operates centers throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. He also guides Virginia Tech's global presence and international efforts, including our Global Education Office, the Language and Culture Institute, and the Center for International Research Education Development. He's been a leader promoting inclusion and diversity throughout OIA for many years. Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Dr. Christie. As I was watching the screen a few minutes ago, it dawned on me that all the panelists and the moderator, we all have one thing in common, and that is our children seem to know one another better than we do as colleagues. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this introduction of the moderator this morning. In that, I have to tell you all that in the spring of 2017, I was flying from Roanoke to Chobe district, and I was I landed in Johannesburg, and after a 5-hour wait, I caught my flight to Kasane, landed there, and I was extraordinarily exhausted. I was picked up at the airport by Kathy and Alexander and Mark Vanderwall, and I tried to sort of camouflage and hide my exhaustion from them, but they could clearly see I was pretty low energy at the time. Nonetheless, Kathy whisked me off to meet with a group of remarkable young women that were part of a support group for sex workers who were transitioning to other more productive livelihoods. And within about 5-10 minutes of my arrival in Kasane, I found myself immediately beginning to feel sorry for myself and to witness for the next several days the remarkable work of Dr. Kathy Alexander. So as VT aspires to become a land-grant institution, we need to hire and attract more faculty to the university with backgrounds and experiences similar to Kathy Alexander. I will shy away from the traditional introduction about academic credentials and so forth and tell you that if there was one person at Virginia Tech that embraced the values of Jane Goodall and Florence Nightingale, it would be Dr. Alexander. She exemplifies courageous leadership. Her life and her career has been spent advancing the human species and the animal species on the vast African continent. And if you look at her background on the website, it'll give you a remarkable glimpse into the life and career of an extraordinary individual. More recently, Professor Alexander has been part of the President of Botswana's Commission on COVID-19 Response. She is the founder of CARICAL, which is the Conservation of African Resources, Animals, Communities, and Land Use, which is committed, it is an NGO based in northern Botswana, which is committed to the conservation of wildlife and improving the livelihoods of communities that must live in partnership with these natural resources that are in abundance in Botswana. Through a combination of research, outreach, and education, her NGO CARICAL has committed to advancing the livelihoods of peoples around the northern Botswana ecosystem. Heads of state from around Southern Africa and foreign ambassadors are frequent visitors that witness her work and her extraordinary contributions to the region and her work in CARICAL. She has, in many ways, taken Virginia Tech to Southern Africa through her research work and more recently with her education and study abroad work with our Global Education Office at Virginia Tech. Generation of future leaders here in the Commonwealth of Virginia and beyond are truly beginning to understand Southern Africa as a result of her important work in that part of the world. And I'm going to end with a small quote of Kathy that I gleaned several months ago. She said, "Education and poverty alleviation are so central to livelihoods, and livelihood is so central to health. We are trying to start kids early by helping them understand the opportunities for improved financial security and for food security, as well as health, and bringing them on board as stewards of the ecosystem and helping them develop and shape into tomorrow's leaders." So without further ado, I want to turn things over to Dr. Alexander and again thank her for her extraordinary work as a leading scholar at Virginia Tech and around the world.
Guru, thank you so much for that. I have to say it's an honor to be asked to moderate this panel. And let me just say that it is the only role I have here is just my love of Africa, really. And I have to say that all the learning I did, it really was in Africa. I learned how to be a better person. I learned how to be a better scientist because of chiefs and mothers and people that showed me the correct way to do research, the correct way to interact with my colleagues. And to have three wonderful people that I respect, and Emmanuel, to go back so far and to get a chance to hear what you have to say, to get a chance to learn from you is a privilege. So without any further ado, please let me turn the floor over and thank everyone for allowing me to participate in some small way with this wonderful panel and the chance to explore the beauty of Africa and all the wisdom that is there. So starting off, and I think here's the point where we'd all love to hear about the amazing things that you've been able to bring Virginia Tech and Africa together. Can you introduce yourselves, your countries of origin, and then consider this question: how has the history of race relations and your experience with race in your country affected your racialized experience in the US? And if I can ask you, Emmanuel, first to start, we'll have 5 minutes. We'll try to get a conversation going.
Thank you, Kathy, and for your kind words. So much has been said about my background already. I would just state that I was born and raised in Ghana. Ghana is in West Africa, and for the benefit of those who might be hearing of Ghana for the first time, Ghana is an average-sized country in Africa, one of about 50 countries, a country of about 30 million people. I am from the central part of Ghana, the Ashanti region, and my tribe is one of about 8 of different tribes in Ghana with very, very different cultures. I grew up mostly in the South, And the north of Ghana has a more similarity to the Sahel region of Mali and Burkina Faso. So even within the country, there is a lot of culture that also crosses national borders. Ghana was historically colonized by the British, and today has a lot of the monuments to the transatlantic slave trade. That is also the reason that we have so many African Americans in the United States. I came to the US in 2000 to start studies in Arkansas. I attended an HBCU and lived in Pine Bluff, a very highly segregated city in the United States. I went on to do my PhD in Indiana, again, a very different culture from Virginia. And I ended up here in Virginia in 2005 as a postdoc and at some point as a faculty member.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. That's wonderful. Khaled?
Yes, thank you very much, Catherine. I'm Khaled Hassouna. Again, I think Melissa introduced me more than I can remember, but I was born in Alexandria, Egypt, and I put a line under Alexandria, Egypt, because this is the original Alexandria. And I grew up, both my parents were professors, but I grew up in a very mixed society. Alexandria had a very mixed society, so we have all colors, all races, all backgrounds, from Southern Europe to Asia to Africa. And I don't think I was introduced to race as race. I was introduced to discrimination, and it's mostly class. But where I grew, it was so mixed, ethnic, religious, that the talk even about it, even as kids, was not an issue. And if this, how this is affect me when I came here, I knew about discrimination and racial discrimination in the States from friends. I was working with the International Boy Scouts, so I had friends from Europe and from the United States since the mid-70s, which when I arrived in the mid-90s here, it was a little bit, I would say a little bit naive. So I drove cross-country a couple of times just to experience the different states and the different people. And from an environmental point of view also, from the park system point of view, which was very awakening. I hope I can do that again sometime. But also it introduced me to what am I? Because when I was in Petersburg with VSU, I discovered that I'm not African, or everyone around me, all Americans around me did not consider that I'm African. I'm not the right color and not the right accent. So I was an Arab, or an Arab as it was called at the time, it was still called. And when I came to Virginia Tech, it was still the same. You know, you're not African, you are something else. You're not black, you're something else, but you're not white. So I made a point in every form that I was filling in front of all the agencies that said, like, okay, can you tell me what am I? And they thought that I was, especially officers, thought that I was troublemaking. And I learned quickly not to continue doing this. So I hope that's started the conversation with me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Helen. I know it's not easy. Joseph?
Yeah, I was born in Zambia, Southern Africa, specifically the southern part of Zambia, which borders Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia. My hometown is Livingstone, named after the Scottish missionary who was the first Westerner to see the mighty Victoria Falls, one of the seven wonders of the world. Now, at the time I was born, the country was called Northern Rhodesia, a colony of Britain. Now, as a colony of Britain, there was segregation in that country at that time. Yeah, we had segregated schools, segregated hospitals, segregated even public transport. You know, even the commercial places, you had shops for the whites and shops for the black people. So that is where I grew up. But that is not the case now. For the last 50 years, Zambia has been a free country without any experience of racism, because that ended when the country gained its independence from the UK. That was the whole reason, in fact, why independence was fought for, to end that racism. So having lived about 50 years without racism, my expectation was coming here into the US, race would not be an issue. Definitely for my children who have never experienced racism back home, this is not an issue to them in this country. I mean, arriving here, that has not been an issue until we see it around, especially in the media. So that has been my experience, and my expectation has been there shouldn't be any racism here in this country, because you have had a long history in which there was an opportunity to get rid of this racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. And I think it's clear to our audience what a wonderful perspective and different perspective each of you hold. And considering that, I'd like to move to the next question. There's considerable attention now on faculty of color, interest in hearing your views, including you in panels like this, asking for presentations. How does that make you feel? I want to ask you, Emmanuel, if you wouldn't mind taking the lead on this and then sharing also with the other panelists their views.
Thank you, Kathy. So it is true that in the last maybe 3 to 4 months or so, from the summer turmoils of the summer, that I've been invited to share my opinion, sometimes in written form, or to join an opinion statement, or to be on a panel, or one way or the other, to come out a little more clearly to be seen by people that I didn't interact with much before. I feel that I'm being noticed a little more, even by OIA, I have to say. I'm being noticed by different groups of people around the community, not necessarily under the best of circumstances, not how I would have liked to be noticed. Sometimes I feel like I have to show up and represent a lot more than I am capable of representing. I am an African, yes, and a very proud African, but as you all can tell, our backgrounds are so different, and Africa is such a diverse continent, and our experiences from different regions of Africa are so different that sometimes I worry that my representation and my unique background could actually misrepresent some Africans. It's also hard to be private. I see myself as a relatively private person, and it's hard to keep my opinion to myself when I have to show up and contribute to panels like this. But it's an opportunity to educate people also, I think. And I took that challenge, and I'm happy to share what I can.
I think that's actually, I might just ask Khaled to comment on that, because you might have a very different experience, given that people don't necessarily consider you, your comments about where you fit in on the spectrum here. How do you feel about this?
I think a little bit different from Emmanuel's experience. I was kind of okay in the 90s. Then when the Gulf War started, I started to have the stigma, not of the race as much as it is, you know, someone who come from or nearby the axis of evil. So the stigma on me was, you know, I had to be noticed everywhere I went, especially public places, airports, stations, bus stations, you name it, from people who can't express themselves when I talk to them, to you know, being taken aside from a line in the airport, just for a couple of extra questions. I think it was randomly selected. The computer random selected me, something like 20 years of my 25 years, 26 years being here. So it's a little bit different consideration, if you will. And so the attention for me, it comes seasonally, whatever the media is portraying. So when things are happening, you know, through the Islamic world or the Middle East or whatever, you know, they look at me as like, so what do you have to say about that?
So Khaled, maybe just clarify for me, your view is that an uptake in interest in you has not really been the current situation, but more the historical concerns of terrorism, and that's been a different experience for you.
It comes and goes depending on the where the trouble is. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Oh, interesting. Joseph, what would you say about this?
Well, for me, I sometimes I even forget that I'm a person of color because of the warmth, the friendliness of my colleagues in the School of Education. So I forget until maybe circumstances in the media remind me that I am different. Otherwise, I don't see color in me. I don't see color in colleagues. I only see how we can work together. And it seems to me that that's the way they look at me also. What is it I have to contribute? What do I put on the table, regardless of my color?
I think that leads us nicely to the next question. And I'm interested to hear how you feel about this. How do your families face these issues of race? Especially children who don't have accents, but might still be marked as other by last names by their teachers, fellow students, and strangers. And Khaled, I'm going to ask you to take this forward, and then and input as well from the other panelists on this.
Okay, so I have, you know, I like very much what Joseph just said now, because I would not have stayed in this country if it was not for friends from all type of races and backgrounds who convinced me to, you know, stay here and grow here, and especially when I had my kids. So in most of our circles, this is not an issue. In around neighbors, it depends. Sometimes in the school, most of the teachers are very understanding, but not all the time. And the little time which someone in the school system is not understanding, it leaves a mark. And you find yourself, you know, like in the office, in the institutes, on campus in general, you don't feel it. You might feel it a little bit from younger students who is not yet into the family of Virginia Tech. So it's very, very little interference, if you will. And really you forget what are you, you just keep working with the group you're working with. But the family feels it more if someone is going shopping, and not in Blacksburg maybe, but you know, you can go 15 minutes away and it's a different variation from someone who is convinced that you don't speak the language, so they have to look you in the eye and shout to make you understand that this is the price for that, for example, all the way to someone who see you in the aisle and they choose to go to another aisle. and you kind of live with it. The impact on the younger generation is much worse because, as my colleagues here have mentioned, they did not have anything else to relate to compare to. So they find it just a very awkward situation. And we try to discuss it. We try to remove the buildup of pressure, if you will. But definitely, they cannot escape from their ethnicity, from what you can eat and cannot eat in the cafeteria, in the school, to why are you not doing this or doing that? And they feel all the time that they are having to defend their situation, not just as teenagers, but also as if they have to represent, that part of the world that they are associated with from their names and from their looks and sometimes even from their accents.
Thank you so much for that. And Joseph, maybe, also bringing in that conversation about their experience in Zambia and then shifting to America and what that's been like, trying to discuss that with your children.
Yeah, for my younger children coming here, say into elementary school, and the problem was not so much color difference as cultural difference. For example, my children were brought up in a culture where the way you speak to an adult is different from the way you speak to a fellow child. For example, looking an adult in the eye may be considered impolite, or raising your voice when talking to an adult is considered impolite. So when my children were doing that, we're soft-spoken and not looking the teachers into the eyes, the teachers felt, well, this is a problem of maybe English as a second language, and therefore put my children in an English and second language program. When for somebody coming from Zambia, English, we may have a different accent, but English is not a foreign language because that is the official language. So yeah, so those are some of the barriers my children faced had to do with the cultural shock, cultural differences, rather than the skin color that they have.
Emmanuel,
Sorry, may I add just one thing?
Yeah.
But for my more adult children, I worry, I fear because of what I see in the media. I'm not comfortable having my child walking alone in the streets. I'm afraid, not that things have happened here in Blacksburg, but because what we see on television. So that is the fear that I have as a parent.
That's actually, yeah, it actually hits you when you think about all of us having children and having to deal with different things. That's something it's not something I have to deal with. And it strikes me as a great challenge. Sorry. Emmanuel, I'd love to hear your views on all this. And also maybe since we've brought up the issue of safety, I think we need to talk about, that's part of the same story, isn't it? How they deal with it and safety. So can I ask you to comment on both of those and how your experience and your family's experience has interacted with those issues that have been brought up?
So I have quite similar experiences with Joseph and Khalid, and so not to repeat, this English as a second language issue actually happened with my daughter, who was born in the US and really never spoke any other language but English. I had to insist that the school take her out of English as a second language program because she was in that program and I didn't even know. Oh. And once in a while she would come home and say, well, I was pulled out of math or science class to go to the ESA teacher. And what did you learn? They showed us stop signs and things like that. And you raise your hand if you see a stop or things like that. And I said, why on earth are you studying this? Why on earth do you have to leave science and math classes to go learn more English when that's the only language you speak. So I think, it can be solvable. It's foundational. Elementary school kids are learning math and science, and this can be a barrier where their interest can be weakened or actually destroyed by pushing them in the direction that they don't really need. Yes, Khalid.
No, after you finish, I just wanted to add one small thing. After you finish, please.
Yeah, so the broader issue of safety, my list of states where I have vowed that my children will not go to school has gotten longer over time. And it is not being picky or petty. It's the things that I see that bother me. My son likes to wear his hoodie in the house. I know they are not allowed to wear it in school. When he follows me to the shop, he's 16 now, and I say, well, you can't put your hoodie on. It's just not, it's interpreted badly when you wear your hoodie. I don't want him to go to school in certain states where that alone can get him killed. I saw a kid walking on the sidewalk with his hoodie on, ended up dead because somebody thought he was a criminal. Things like that. There are more stories to share and other discussions.
If I might just add, it's part of the safety part is, I come working in the Park Service. I had to be very aware of my surroundings and everything, studying the ecosystems, everything happening around me. And I taught especially my older kid that as he was growing up, dragging him into different environments. And so he stands out among the other kids. He's a little bit taller, and he noticed everything happening around him, including especially the bad things. So he had a couple of encounters with the police officer in the school and the counselor on school who said, like, you are a troublemaker. Whenever there is something wrong happening, you're looking at it, so you know that this is happening. Yeah, and it came to near interrogation in the school at one point. That I bet you know this, and you're covering up on someone, and this makes the whole life becomes awkward. So, do you want them to be aware of themselves and their surrounding? And definitely, if we're aware of ourselves or we're self-conscious, you can imagine a teenager have how many levels of added layers to that.
Absolutely. And I think it leads us to another question that was addressed to the panel, which was, have race issues made you feel unsafe or concerned about your safety in Southwest Virginia or around the country? And Khalid, I know that you just got a chance to touch on that. So I might ask Emmanuel as well, because he's a field biologist. He spends time in the field. So there's some interesting elements that come to bear. Would you feel free to comment on that, Emmanuel?
Yes, so Kathy, race issues and being a field biologist is not just a unique problem of race. Being a field biologist and working on private lands and going into people's backyard in general, and especially when you have to go in government vehicles and things like that. It's a risk for all of us in natural resources sciences who have to deal with landowners. But particularly, of course, for somebody of my background, I have sometimes avoided certain areas altogether where I don't go because it is just not safe. And I don't need to be dramatic about that. I have a relative sense of safety in Blacksburg. I go to landowners around here within 10 minutes of my house and ask for permission to work on their streams in their backyard. That is fine. Another 20 minutes out of town, that is not fine. I need to have innocent white American students with me to even make that attempt to go to certain places. Now, of course, that means that I'm constrained as a researcher to the horizons that I can explore. And yes, so that a sense of safety in my work is always present when I'm thinking and planning what to do.
Sometimes I think people aren't aware of just how far these challenges and constraints go beyond the sort of static idea of someone being rude to you, but just even how you manage to be able to do your work. Joseph, could you comment on that? I think this is such a valuable conversation.
Yeah, my kind of work has not exposed me to such kinds of safety issues. As I go to schools, public schools, I feel safe in there. To follow up my student teachers to observe what they are doing. But what I don't do is to venture out of these familiar spaces, like being in my classrooms here at Virginia Tech and being in classes and schools are around the region. Beyond that, I don't go because of the fear of the unknown, which is really based on the feeling that it is not safe out there. I mean, when you see, especially in the media, the kind of things that you see, you tend to be very, very careful. This is what I do. So I do not venture into spaces that I don't feel safe. Unfortunately, my job does not require me to do that. So I sympathize with Emmanuel, whose job really demands that he goes out into the community to do that.
Hala, did you have anything? Oh, sorry, Emmanuel, go ahead.
Yeah, so, and if I can extend a little bit over here, you know, it's the job is the first that I think of when I think of safety of me. But when I think of safety and my family, it's beyond the job, you know. It is nice to be able to hop in the car and drive your family around the country and take them to places where they can change their environment and enjoy nature. It is also known that it's very difficult for African Americans and for that matter, Africans in general, to go to certain spaces that are generally considered the preserve of Native and white Americans. I have a very vivid story of a family's vacation in Minneapolis that I rarely share, but maybe this is a good context in which to share.
Yes, please.
So in 2016, my family took a very big road trip to the Midwest. We visited 7 states, and one of the states we visited was Minnesota. We spent a day or two with my graduate school roommate, who is white, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And the following morning, he was getting ready to go to work, and I told him we are heading for Minneapolis. We're going to see the Mall of America. That's one of the big things on the KISS list, and we're heading up there. And my friend said he was going to call in to work and be absent that day and drive us to Minneapolis in his family van. And I did not fully appreciate that gesture of my friend. So we went to Minneapolis and we spent a day in the Mall of America and came back to La Crosse and returned to Blacksburg the following day. On our way back from La Crosse, the day after we visited St. Paul, on the road, on the radio, Philandro Castile had been shot by Minneapolis police, pulled over in his vehicle for broken taillight, and he ended up dead. So that is when I made the connection between the gesture my friend made and, you know, how unsafe it was for me to just keep going and roam some places that he knew was not safe for me and my family to roam. So the safety is something that needs a little more calculation for what we decide to do, even with our spare time, not just our work time.
Right. So it's all encompassing. Khaled, do you have something that you'd like to add to this? I know you've had different.
No,
But similar-
I do definitely agree with, even with a different tint of color with Emmanuel and Joseph, but I definitely agree with the idea that there is nothing called minor issue when it comes to if you're different. So, sometimes I would tell my kid, we shouldn't be doing this. And he said, like, come on, everyone is doing this. It's even if it's something happened wrong, it's minor. It's like, no, there is no minor here. At one point, no one will look that you are American. No one would look that you are born here, haven't been anywhere else. This is your home. Blacksburg is your home. They would not see that. And it's some of the things you would not know how much this shirt or a Virginia Tech cap would take you in our region. There is a Virginia Tech cap in the car all the time because you never know where your car is going to break down. And just that would be, oh, you're one of them guys in tech. This breaks the first barrier of you're dangerous. All the way to when I lived out in the county for a while in Lynchburg. I used to, 20 years ago, I go to Lynchburg and something is, you enter a place and everyone is looking at you. And I felt I was very relieved when an older gentleman wearing another Virginia Tech cap came, and I find someone knocking on my shoulder and just shaking my hand and said, like, "Porkies, good. What year?" So I told him, "Do you want the master's or the PhD or the work?" And he said, "I'm like, I think a graduate of 59, and you're a fellow guy, and let me buy you a coffee." In Lynchburg, I was like, man, I arrived somewhere.
I think that brings me nicely. I love what you said there, and that brings us nicely to the next question, which is really the flip side of it. And looking at your experience in Africa with people coming to that region of the world. So the field of international development is generally white and considered colonialist, approaching Africa as a site of little knowledge and huge problems that require white saviors. How do we productively approach this? What is the role for Africa scholars in development? What's your impression of the way this reciprocity works? How people come and behave in Africa and deal with it professionally, your experiences here? I think it's a nice, and if I can ask, Joseph, could you take us forward on this?
Yeah, thank you. I speak to this question from the point of view of a person who worked for 20 years or more coordinating projects in Africa, projects funded by people from the West. Now, and also I spent many years serving on policy advisory boards for projects that were not within my own department. So I can speak from experience, seeing what some consultants were doing coming from maybe Europe or the US or Asia, coming to Africa thinking they know the problems, they have the solutions, and therefore there's nobody that they should listen to on the ground in Africa. Now the results, two main things were happening there. One is there were some white elephants. You dig boreholes that nobody uses because you put the borehole in the wrong place, for example. So yeah, so white elephants. The other is the frustrations among the local people that you found. Some of them were educated here. So when they go home, you don't want to listen to them anymore. So yeah, but I also saw good ways of doing that. Yeah, people would come from the US or Europe and so on, and work together
Mm.
with the local experts to investigate the problems and together come up with a solution to what needs to be done. So that was good practice, identifying the local expertise and being able to work with them. Now I have spent 10 years here and also working on projects to be implemented back home, like through CIRED. Now, what I have seen here in Virginia Tech, I love it. One, I have seen teams and participated in teams going to Africa, on missions to go and identify what the problem is. And I've seen CIRED working with African experts based in Africa, right? People in Malawi, some of whom were trained here. So Virginia Tech recognizes that expertise that is back home. And also the third thing I see here is that when there's a project like now, we are talking about a project, possible project in Malawi, possible project in Kenya, within the faculty here at Virginia Tech, right? CIRED identifies who has those experiences, who can relate well with what the people back in Kenya or in Malawi want. So in addition to working together with experts based in Africa, you have people here on campus who have the African experience. So this working together for me is the answer. It's not good to imagine that you have a solution to a problem that has not pained you.
Absolutely. I think, Emmanuel, do you want to comment on that?
So I'm largely in agreement with Joseph. I think Virginia Tech is now moving in the right direction. We may have missed opportunities in the past for underutilizing the African experience on campus. So, I've been here for 15 years. I think I started really productively having relationship with CIRED just 2 years ago, and spent a ton of time working on a proposal that wasn't successful, but it was clearly one of the efforts to bring in direct African expertise to compete for proposals, grants that Virginia Tech would be the lead on. So it's a right move, and we need to do more of that.
Alain, did you want to comment on that?
I can't comment on that. They both are like trampling our horn. They're talking about CIRED, and definitely this is something OIE and CIRED have been doing diligently in the last few years, and so really this is the way to go. The problem with that is the donor companies, the agencies, or countries for such projects, they have their way of selecting who's doing the stuff. So I'm glad that we are doing it right, time and again, even if we're not getting it, Emmanuel, sorry, but next time, hopefully we'll get one, good one. But, it becomes a matter of a principle. Do we want to, how the way we want to do it?
And if I might,
yes.
I might just add one of the things here that, from my perspective, just to contribute the flip side of that, is that having worked for 24 years in Africa, and I sit in a meeting with government officers and someone will arrive, a white person from America, having 4 years of experience, and tell the government how things need to go. And people will ask him in front of government officers, and it's usually him, what is going to happen? What are the choices? What should be? And the lack of humility in all of that is stark. And I think I just wanted to go back to the knowing, Joseph, that you talked about, the knowing the problem. And it doesn't matter how educated you are. If you don't know the details of that problem, you cannot help anyone. And I'm impressed with the need for us to engage knowing and then bring in knowledge as a supplement, because knowledge can also be non-university or non-traditional. And there's so many wise chiefs that I would tell you could tell me more about how to do my research than anyone else. And I want to just add that we're hoping to get some chiefs from Botswana here to actually help our students learn how to recognize the wisdom and the beauty of the African culture. And like I say, it's been the most important thing in shaping my life.
It takes time and money that most of the time in our proposals, we don't have that leeway to do it right. So I think we're doing very good work, but it's we still have way to go to be able to really do a right participatory problem solving. We are on the right track, but we can see hope back up there.
That's what this panel is actually important for, getting those visions correct and looking ahead positively. And I'd like to circle back though, and there's a question here that I think captures that. How have race inequalities, and this also goes back to how you fund things and the like, in America impacted your life and work? How do you see these issues playing out in your life, your career in America? What do you want people to know about the experience of an African scholar in the US? And do you observe a systemic institutional racism at Virginia Tech that needs to be discussed? And I think we should feel open about that. Emmanuel, can I ask you to start this part off?
Yes, Kathy. So we've addressed some of these, with respect to where to work and how to present yourself and all those things. But also with respect to institutional racism, that's a very complex situation to decipher. Here I am. I'm a faculty in College of Natural Resources and Environment. I can't say the college is racist. After all, they hired a Black person. I am surrounded by some pretty nice people. And so with respect to the Virginia Tech environment, I'm in some sort of a bubble where I see institutional and systemic racism not particularly helping is when a third party has to experience the experience that I have when I get outside of that bubble. So for example, I am in the College of Natural Resources. I am supposed to serve the state. That is one of our missions. We are a land grant institution. We are natural resources scientists, and our research is supposed to help solve natural resources problems in the state. That means I have to work with the state agencies that fund and utilize the research that we produce. I was hired without having an opportunity to actually meet with a state agency, which I later discovered was a very, very regular part of how we hire faculty here. Once I became a faculty member, it is the expectation that I establish a local research program. I have to work with a state agency where you have to know somebody. You have to be friends with a state agency to be called on to do work for the state agency. It never happened with me. I have to attach myself to someone else who the state agency folks trust to even do anything for the state. I feel like my expertise is not needed by the state. Virginia Tech likes me, treats me well in many ways, but my professional career is also impacted by my relationship with the agencies that support faculty in my field. So it's a very complex relationship there. I am just a sample size of one also, and I like to remind everyone of that. I see myself as friendly and approachable. Maybe I'm a bit too friendly, but that has not helped me to establish a relationship with the state. But as a sample size of one, the only Black faculty in the entire College of Natural Resources, I'm still careful to draw conclusions from my experience, because maybe if there was a second Black person, their experience with the state would be different. So I'm just trying to temper the narrative I've just shared with caution about how far to interpret that.
But I think it's important to raise those issues so we can think about them and see how much we need to improve our systems, or how can we actually improve our performance collectively and individually in these types of environments. Joseph, I'm going to ask you to, what would you share with that?
I think that looking at the policies at Virginia Tech, the structures and the practice, I think we are heading in the right direction. I serve on a diversity committee for the college, right? And I'm aware that nearly every college has that same structure. And you have these structures higher up, to the highest possible level in the hierarchy of leadership within Virginia Tech. So the intention is there. The policies are there. The structures are there. I mean, this panel discussion today, within that framework, to show how Virginia Tech is putting itself in the right place concerning the addressing of these issues that should not be there. So this is good, yeah, but I cannot say that the presence of these structures and policies and practices mean that automatically there are no people on campus who feel excluded, yeah, by reason of race or by reason of gender or some other way that could exclude them. They could be there, but the policies are here, the structures are here, the intention is here to do the right thing.
Thank you. Khaled, did you want to add something to that?
I agree with this, and the last few years, I wouldn't say the last few months, the last few years, Virginia Tech have been taking very strong, very steady steps towards on that way. I've been serving on diversity committees and caucuses for the last few years, and for me it was a very good learning experience. The one thing I want to, with Emmanuel talking about the relationship between our policies and the policies of others that we're dependent on, with the state agencies, I have similar experience. And actually, in one of the parties, my boss was told, as long as you have this team leader, you'll never get anything out of us. So I started to put my name number 3 or number 4, and it worked better. So there is a different variation of this, and sometimes you accept it, sometimes you don't. But again, Virginia Tech for us, I wouldn't say I'm living in Virginia. I'm living in Virginia Tech. My home is not just that street number, it's that the office and the colleagues I work with. And when something stressful happens in this office, your world, your continent crumbles. You have nothing to stand on. And this level of stress of this on you and your family is way beyond what any calculation can tell you. I just want to end this with a joke, kind of. There was a T-shirt that I used to laugh about the caption on it so much. Then for the last maybe 20 years, I don't. It's like, my name is National Security Alert. What does your name do?
And I think actually, thank you for sharing that. And I think that leads us to the next question nicely. Do you believe that race issues and concerns are the same for people born in the USA versus those that were not born in the USA? And if not, how would you characterize these differences? And I'm going to ask you, Joseph, to start off on this. I think this is an interesting next question.
Yeah. First of all, I should say that race issues are race issues. Whether you were born here or you are a recent immigrant, they are race issues still. The pain is still the same. However, in terms of the impact, I don't know what my 2 colleagues will say, but I think that for a person who was born here, the impact is different because they would have a greater understanding of the issues than I do. They have grown up here, they can see what I cannot see, right? So I respect that. And secondly, I am a voluntary immigrant. So if the kitchen is too hot for me, I have the choice of getting out of the kitchen. Whereas somebody who is born in the kitchen and has to be raised in there, the impact of the problem is different. So I respect that. And also to use an African proverb, the fact that I come to the river to draw water every day does not mean that I know the problems of the crocodile as much as the hippo does. The hippo is there in the water all the time, so he understands it more.
Wow, thank you for that. And I'm going to ask Emmanuel, what would you say to add to that?
So Joseph really addressed this issue nearly completely, I have to say. And so all I would add is knowing where I came from and the fact that I voluntarily came to the United States really makes my problems quite different. That's my son back there. I hope you all take that for the family that we've been talking about over here. I know that if things get too complicated for me, I know where I came from. I can go back. And I always have to keep that in mind, that the oppression and the exclusion and the other issues that African Americans face has much higher, more complex consequence for them than it does for me. Because if it doesn't work for me, I can go back.
Helen?
I can't agree more. When I'm driving somewhere and someone gets upset and say, go home, I can get out of the problem by saying, yes, sir. What is home for my son who's born, raised here? I still have family, I still have this, I still have that back home. We came here to grow. Then when we had kids here, it became for their sake, we are here. So when they are, we feel that if they're threatened, we can go somewhere else. But actually, if they're threatened, there is nowhere else for them to go. And this becomes very sobering. And this might be one of the reasons I went into all this work with diversity and inclusion and studied more about it from different aspects, because where is home? For me, I know still, kind of, after 25 years, I'm not sure. I worked for the Commonwealth of Virginia more than I worked to anyone else in my life. But for him, for her, what is where is the way out, as Emmanuel was saying?
Oh, that's a very important point. I think that the next question then builds on this. What are the biggest misconceptions you've seen that Americans have about your country or about Africa in general? And how would you suggest we combat these misconceptions? I mean, I'm going to turn it back to you and ask you to take this forward.
So I, having been in the US for 20 years now and having had children in the school and being a very big consumer of news, what I have to say about this is a lot, but maybe I can summarize it in two main ways. I think the educational system and the media are two ways that Americans are being deprived of proper education about Africa. Our children learn very little about Africa in their classes. Sometimes my kids complain about it. Why do I spend a whole year learning world geography and spend 2 days talking about Africa? So they come out of school knowing very little about Africa. The news media works very hard to find negative stories about Africa to bring in the news headlines whenever that happens. But you rarely hear when good things happen in Africa, and a lot of good things happen in Africa. So, you know, the United States spends a lot of money trying to get countries to be democratic. And my own country over the last 30 years or so have changed governments every 4 years through the ballot. And 20 out of those 30 years have been in the US. Ghana changing the government through the ballot peacefully has never been a headline story. The US taxpayer paid for some of this success. It's never reported. A little skirmish over some natural resource or colonial borders that have created perpetual fights in Africa would make it to the US news headline. So Americans are not properly educated about Africa. And that affects how Americans approach Africa. The previous question about how international development, you know, all of people who go to Africa and they think they know the answer to questions is because that's what they've learned over here. And so the education of Americans about Africa through the schools and through the media, in my opinion, is inadequate. It makes Americans think that Africa is just full of problems, that Africa is full of diseases and poverty and wars and what have you. And I tell you, there are places in Africa that you won't want to live if you were sent there from wherever you are in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think Americans have to know that.
No, I would agree. My love of Botswana, as you know, I would live there. I do live there. Khaled, I wanted to ask you, we just got a few minutes because we've got a really important closing question that I want to give everyone an opportunity to explore. What would you add to that, if anything?
Yeah, you know, we don't eat crocodiles. We don't live in pyramids. We don't ride the camels to the university. Although sometimes I make fun of people when they have questions like this, and I can take them on a very long ride on a camel there.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I have to say, I'm the most really excited about this last question because it's been such a transformative thing in my life. And I'm going to ask Joseph, if you would, who reminds me, obviously regionally, very much of the chiefs that I work with in Botswana, if I can say, and the sayings and the way of framing things. Are there experiences as we close this wonderful and amazing conversation? And I'd like to give you enough time to explore this. Are there experiences and wisdom or insights from your home country, and we have time to talk about this, that you think would be useful for us to hear at this very critical time in our country's history?
Yes, out of Africa, one good thing that we can draw out is the philosophy of Ubuntu, yeah, spelled U-B-U-N-T-U, Ubuntu. Now, at the bottom of all this philosophy is the thinking, the principle that you are a human being because I am human, right? That humanness is something that we share. And therefore, we should have togetherness rather than individualism. So not every human being saying, this is me, I will do this, I should do that, glory should come to me. No. It should be what is in this for us all. What is it that we can do together for the good of our own community? So the African philosophy of Ubuntu believes in togetherness instead of individualism. It recognizes the dignity of life, the dignity of humanness, right? How we relate to one another. Even the concept of family is different. When we go, you and I go to Africa and I point at somebody and say, this is my son, your understanding of son is different from my understanding of son. To begin with, my brother's son is my son. Yeah, I have discussions with the colleagues going to Africa with them. Of you, no, tell me your biological son. I say, well, this one is biological, because we believe in the extended family system. My father's brother is my father, not uncle. My mother's sister is my mother, not an aunt. Because when the woman who bore me dies, her sisters just take over as if nothing has happened in the family. So the concept of family is broad. So when I come to the workplace, coming with this philosophy, I expect that when we are doing things we do together, we make joint decisions, we investigate problems together, right? This philosophy also underscores the need for generosity, kindness, and respect for the aged. As I was saying about my children experiencing problems in the classroom, you respect a teacher because of the age difference. Yeah, the encounter is not equal. So those positive values coming out of Ubuntu are values that Africa respects, right? So to underline is the difference between I and we. So the emphasis is on the we. Let's do this together, because I love you, because you complete my humanness. Yeah, without you, I'm not human. If I remain the only being in the world, I'm not human. I'm as good as a tree. The other thing that this philosophy recognizes is good stewardship for the natural things and the wildlife around us, the environment, yeah, sustaining it, because it's part of us. It's part of us, the environment. So respect for the environment, respect for other human beings, respect for community, the dignity of life. So those are the values coming out of the philosophy of Ubuntu. In fact, a friend of mine here, Josiah Toh, and I will soon have a book coming out on Ubuntu, where we have drawn chapters from many African scholars explaining their experiential knowledge of Ubuntu. Yeah, because we have children being born here in the diaspora who don't have those values. So unless those values are written down, there is a danger that they will grow up without knowing the humanness, what it means to be a human being.
I love that. I think it's just so powerful. I want to ask, though, I think your point about your experience and your cultural wisdom that may build on this or be similar, but can I ask you to share from your region and your history?
I cannot add to what Joseph just said, except that I learned it in a different language, but the same concept. And this made me, when I met Joseph the first time 10 years ago, I met him through a person who said, his family, like meet him, his family. He doesn't know this, by the way, don't tell him. But when I first time met him and shook hands, I felt we're family. It's very hard to explain this concept to anyone else but some of us. The other thing that I want to add to that concept, that life matters. Everything have a soul. Everything is alive, even stones. And that makes life is the most important. So the relations within this life that we have reduced to call social relations is the most important thing for your survival. And if you don't have this connection, you're not surviving. And this is, I think what Africa makes run in your blood, even if you go there for a little bit.
Mhm.
I think so. Emmanuel?
I'm in total agreement.
Yeah. Yeah. I just have to say that I'm so impressed with all of you. And if I can break just a little bit, I might ask Guru just to comment on that. One of the things I want to tell you is when he was in Botswana, he was there for a very short time, but his love and acceptance, and I think that's why he wanted to have this panel, of wanting us all to share and understand that globally there's so much for us to bring to the table, and the wisdom and the expertise that we have right here, which is just extraordinary. They still ask about him. Where is he? Where is he? Please come back. And we need him, because it didn't matter who they were. They could have just been a person on the street, and he saw value in them. So I just wanted to ask, Guru, I just thought maybe there's a regional wisdom framework that was similar in your region.
Kathy, thank you. Let me just say I'm humbled by the depth of perspective and overwhelmed by the wisdom of our panelists this morning and afternoon. All of you have talked about this notion of knowledge and knowingness. That is a formal certification of degrees and diplomas that leads to formal knowledge, and the informality of knowingness. And I have to say, when on my first visit to northern Botswana, and just seeing the kind of camaraderie, as Emmanuel was talking about, the 53 nations of the African continent, the vastness of space, and the sense of community, the belief in the humanity and the power of humanity, and the embracing of all living creatures collectively together, how they can survive in that ecosystem, it just took me aback. But then, as you bring it back, Kathy, to our current context here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and being the descendant of a colonial subject myself, you go a few hundred miles away and you go into colonial Williamsburg, where we as a nation celebrate colonialism. And I know of no other nation in the world that celebrates that. Everybody else is running away from that. But here in Virginia and here in the States, we celebrate that. And you have people enacting those times of suppression and oppression and subjugation and so forth. It is remarkable for me to witness sometimes the miscarriage of history as well, that we aren't quite sure what needs to be celebrated and what needs to be kept in museums, if you will.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there, but hats off to all of you for having such a deep and profound conversation.
Well, and I think actually you raised the last remaining question, really, that I think is really, we've come full circle, is consistent with the mission of Virginia Tech, and certainly a deep passion of everyone here, and Guru specifically. And I'd like, Joseph, given your beautiful encapsulation of the philosophy, to comment on this. The question is, when it comes to studying abroad in Africa, what do you think the best practices would be to advertise and inform students about the locations that the programs they visit, in regards to being culturally sensitive, aware, especially if elements of the program include service learning? And we have about 3 minutes, if I can ask you just to touch on that. Such an important question.
Right. I think in addition to advertising the program in terms of the location on the world map where these people are going, there is need to have orientation programs, right? Before people make a final commitment to participate on this journey, so that during that orientation, you explain these cultural nuances that are relevant in the places where they are going. For example, the kind of dress. What is considered appropriate dress for women in certain parts of Africa. Again, it depends, because Africa is vast, as Emmanuel reminded us at the beginning. Africa is vast. Cultures differ, but a study abroad program has a specific destination to go. So to explain what kind of dress is appropriate in that location, what kind of food are they going to find, and how do people relate to one another in that particular area? For example, the importance of a greeting, right? In my part of Africa, you are told that you only bypass an anthill, right? A hill, not a human being. And when you greet a human being, it's not simply hello, then you move away. A greeting is an important ceremony, right? I will tell you to exemplify this point. Two people meet at the river, greeting one another. How are you? How is your family? How is your field, right? Your corn, how is it doing? Your goats. What about the chickens? No, you want to know everything around that human being.
Yeah.
After a greeting of 15 minutes, the person who initiated the greeting says, I'm sorry to cut the greeting short. I just came to pick some water because my house is on fire.
Joseph, thank you so much. And I think with that, a perfect opportunity to turn it back to Maria Elisa, who's put in an extraordinary amount of effort to bring us all together. If I can, Maria Elisa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I've been listening and enjoying this wonderful conversation. So really, all I have to say is, let me find my actual prepared notes. But obviously, on behalf of everybody who's been listening, I've been getting some emails from people who've been very excited being on this, listening to you guys talk. And so thank you very much to the three panelists and to the moderator. And to all of you who've joined us today. I'm sorry if you were frustrated you didn't get questions in, but as you saw, we covered a lot of questions. We covered almost all of them, if not all of them actually, that came in. And this group of panelists actually put a lot of time into this. We met twice previously for 90 minutes on our own just to discuss the questions and actually have this interesting conversation. So it's been very exciting and I really appreciate having been able to be part of it. So we've covered a wide range of topics that hopefully have broadened our understanding of race and of the diversity of experience within Africa. Ultimately, please remember that the goal is to spur us to action to achieve a more equitable world. That's the point of these conversations, is to learn and to act. So the last thing, the follow-up survey, Caroline has put in the link there. We'd really like to get your feedback on what you thought about this, what you're going to do, and any recommendations for future talks. So that's all I have to say. And so thank you all and be well.